Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're an educator, a school leader, or honestly just someone fascinated by how our physical environments shape human behavior, you are in exactly the right place today. We're going to explore this really powerful premise from the Belonging Classroom Framework. It's this idea that your physical space is literally speaking to your students long before you ever utter a single word of instruction. We spend so much of our time planning curriculum, assessments, perfectly timed lessons, but the environment we create, that's actually the very first lesson our students receive. I'm incredibly excited to unpack this with you today because it completely shifts how we think about building a space where every single student feels seen, valued, and genuinely ready to learn. Here's our roadmap for the journey today. We'll start with, before you begin teaching, dive into the science of belonging, look through the student's eyes, unpack 5 design principles, and wrap up with the Belonging Walk Challenge. Okay, let's dive right into this first part, before you begin teaching. Every classroom out there has an invisible curriculum. These are the silent messages being broadcast by the physical space, the daily routines, the very layout of the desks. And shaping that invisible curriculum, it takes immense intentionality. It does not happen by accident. I really want you to let this quote sink in. Students decide whether they belong before they decide whether to engage. That right there is the absolute core truth of this entire explainer. Belonging is not some happy accident. It isn't created by chance or just by having a friendly teacher. True belonging is built by meticulous, intentional design. Because if a student doesn't feel like they fit in, all their cognitive energy gets spent worrying about their safety and status, instead of focusing on that amazing academic material you've prepared. So ask yourself this. If your classroom could literally speak before you arrived in the morning, what would it say? Take a second and just picture your own physical space. What are your walls communicating? What does the seating arrangement say about who holds the power in the room? What messages are your students absorbing before the bell even rings? That brings us to Section 2, the science of belonging. To really grasp why that last question is so absolutely crucial, we have to look at the science. Creating a welcoming environment isn't just educational fluff, right? And it's definitely not just about making a room look pretty for open house. It's a fundamental human need backed heavily by psychological science. So the crucial point is this. Belonging is an instructional strategy. It's not a luxury, it's the foundation. Our ultimate goal is to create the optimal conditions for learning to flourish. When we talk about belonging, what we're really talking about is creating psychological safety. That is an absolute prerequisite for academic risk-taking. You can't expect a kid to tackle long division at the whiteboard or share a vulnerable essay if they fundamentally don't feel secure in that room. And the science backs this up beautifully. When students genuinely feel connected to their environment and to their peers, the academic payoff is incredible. They participate way more often, they ask questions without that paralyzing fear of looking foolish, they persevere through rigorous tasks, they take those vital academic risks. Plus, they're vastly more capable of regulating their own behavior. Psychological safety directly, and I mean directly, translates into academic confidence and success. All right, Section 3. Through the student's eyes. Now that we know the why, we really need to flip the script on how we look at our own spaces. I want you to imagine you're a brand new student walking through your classroom door for the very first time. If you walk in and see completely blank, sterile walls, or maybe walls just filled with generic store-bought posters, your brain subconsciously thinks, okay, I have to fit into this pre-existing mold. But if you walk in and immediately see student work proudly displayed, your brain registers something entirely different. It thinks, oh, my ideas actually matter here. My contributions have value. It's a direct, totally logical progression from physical observations straight to deep psychological perceptions of safety and identity. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between a space that's intentionally designed and one that's unintentional. When you design proactively, you're broadcasting these great positive messages. Your voice matters. Mistakes are just a natural part of learning. Everyone contributes. But if you aren't careful, the room can broadcast some seriously jarring unintentional messages like, only the top performing students get recognized here, or perfection is expected, or worst of all, compliance matters more than connection. Kids pick up on those subtle cues instantly. Let's move to Section 4 and get into the practical side, 5 design principles. Let's see how this builds into the 5 belonging design elements. This is where we equip you with the what, why, and how. These are 5 actionable strategies that will help you eliminate those unintentional messages we just talked about. They're sequential, and they deeply connect to one another. Entry, representation, relationships, expectations, and finally, hope. Let's break these down and see what they actually look like in practice. Starting with principles 1 and 2. Entry matters immensely. Students literally need to feel welcomed the second they cross the threshold.
We're talking personal greetings at the door, and actually scratch that. Not just a distracted nod while you're checking your email, but a real, genuine connection. Maybe try having some inviting music playing or a clear visual welcome message on the board. Then we look at representation. When a student enters that welcoming room, they have to physically see themselves reflected in the materials. Are diverse cultures, languages, and communities showcased in your classroom library? Are they in the images on the walls? What about the examples you use in your lessons?
Next up is Principle 3, relationships matter. And look, this goes way beyond a student just knowing you, the teacher. Creating true psychological safety means intentionally building opportunities for students to know one another. You do this by heavily normalizing mistakes. Celebrate them as literal proof of learning. Encourage constant questions. Visibly value curiosity. And foster a space where respectful disagreement isn't just tolerated, but it's explicitly taught and practiced by the class.
Now, what's really interesting about Principle 4 is how it completely rethinks the way we talk about rules. Compliance language demands obedience, right? Things like follow the rules. But community language, that invites belonging. We help everyone learn. Just by shifting your vocabulary away from rigid enforcement and leaning into supportive, inclusive expectations, you signal to your students that they are vital members of a shared, collaborative community.
And that brings us to Principle 5, hope matters. The ultimate goal of all these design elements, the whole shebang, is to make sure that every single student leaves your room harboring this exact belief. I can succeed here. You design for hope by integrating visible, constant reminders of progress. Use growth mindset language, post incredibly clear learning goals, and make it a solid habit to celebrate growth rather than just celebrating final perfect grades. Finally, let's move to Section 5, the Belonging Walk Challenge. It is time to apply what you've learned today, ideally before your students ever show up for day one. This is a highly actionable 10-minute belonging walk challenge. Literally, I want you to walk out of your classroom, close the door, and then open it back up. Walk in and evaluate the space purely through the eyes of a first-time student. During this 10-minute walk, systematically look at these specific physical elements. Check out the doorway. Is it inviting? Look at the seating. Does the layout encourage collaboration, or does it promote isolation? Scan the walls. Are you just decorating them, or are you reflecting student identities and their actual work? Gauge the overall tone, and ask yourself what implicit expectations are silently hanging in the air. As you wrap up your walk, here is your clear-cut action plan. Number 1, identify a strength. What is your classroom already communicating really well? Number 2, identify one specific area that could be redesigned to be a bit more inclusive. And number 3, commit to implementing just one change based on that realization before the first week of school. Seriously, small, immediate changes like this have a profound, lasting impact on how your students engage. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to ponder today. What is your classroom communicating before instruction begins? Because belonging isn't created by posters. It's communicated through every single interaction, every routine, and every intentional decision you make about your space. If you want to dive deeper, definitely check out the Belonging Classroom Setup Checklist from the source material to help guide your redesign. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer to explore the science and art of designing for connection. Now, go take that 10-minute walk and see what your room has to say.